Hello, and welcome to Confidently Compliant, a food safety podcast. I'm your host, Paula Parejo, and I'm from the BRCGS Americas team. For those of you who don't know BRCGS, we are a GFSI benchmark program owner that is well known for our food safety standard. But we have standards in all areas of the supply chain, including storage and distribution, retail, consumer products, agents and brokers, packaging, ethical, plant-based, and gluten-free. Today, I have with me Scheme Manager of the Professional Program, Robert Moss, a member of the BRCGS Performance Enhancement Team, and we're going to uncover how to approach your employer about professional development, focusing on how to bring this up as a concept and ways that you can invest in your organization by investing in yourself. Welcome, Rob.
Thank you for having me, Paula. It's really exciting to be on the show. I know we've been trying to organise this for quite some time now, I think since perhaps around Christmas. So yeah, it's finally good to be able to jump on.
Absolutely. It's definitely been a little bit of a journey with everything going on in 2020, but I'm glad that we're here and we're finally able to talk about this. And I don't think it could have come at a better time. So, Rob, I know that you listen to this podcast because I'm pretty sure you're BRCGS's biggest fan on LinkedIn. If you are ever looking to connect with someone, Rob Moss is your guy. Super active, always looking to build new members in the community, and call him Rob because he'll get mad if you call him Robert.
Yeah, I definitely think I'm building my reputation as being BRCGS's biggest fan, not only with you, but with everyone else, because I do tend to spend a lot of time on LinkedIn. Mm-hmm. I'm always kind of speaking to new professionals and speaking to some of our other learners from within our team. So yeah, probably spend way too much time on there, but it's probably a good plug for me. If anyone else wants to get in touch, find me on LinkedIn. Always more than happy to have a chat.
Absolutely. So we are in the year 2020, which means that we are facing a global pandemic. In a time of panic and difficulty, we've received a ton of requests on training opportunities and ways that food safety professionals can stay informed and become as prepared as they can to face the unknown. As we know, there's a sea of options on how to approach professional development. And Rob, I really want us to kind of get into what this looks like. And you being someone in the training and development area, when someone has a blanket statement of, okay, I want to explore training options, what is the first step that they need to take in order to begin this journey?
Yeah, sure. With this one, I think it's always good to actually start with a bit of self-reflection. With training, it's something that gets overlooked a lot of the time, and it's really easy to have some sort of long-term vision of like, oh, I want to become a manager, or I want to go on a certain course, without actually understanding the underlying reasons as to why you want to do that and what your underlying goals are. So I think as a starting point, it's really good to sit down and, look at yourself and make a list of your key strengths and perhaps some of the areas in which you could do with a bit of development. Mm-hmm. A lot of the time, if you've maybe got some trusted colleagues or some friends that are willing to help you on this, it's always a good idea to maybe sit down with them and get some external feedback, because sometimes other people's perception of your strengths and areas for improvement might actually be different to your own. So yeah, it's definitely good to look inwards as a starting point. Beyond that, I think it's really good to very clearly define your goals. So you can say, in the future, yes, my long-term goal is to be a manager, but what does that mean in reality, and why do I want to achieve that? So, a kind of goal within that stream could be to, develop your skills around coaching or mentoring, for example, which sits within that kind of that management area. I think then within that, you can then identify your goals and then break your goals down into small, manageable chunks and trackable milestones. So, with your long-term goal of being a manager, you can say as part of that, you want to coach and mentor someone. So as part of a small, manageable chunk within that, you could identify that in the next year, for example, you'd want to find perhaps your own mentor or your own coach. Mm-hmm. So when you break it down into those more manageable chunks, you can then really start to identify which training is going to be of most benefit for you.
That's a really smart way to go. I really appreciate that breakdown, because I think planning ahead which is something that some people might not think about. When you say plan ahead, like let's get some development skills so it can help me in the future. Not breaking down exactly what a role entails, like if you want to be a manager, for example, is a really big rookie mistake, because sometimes you can look at a title and something and just see pieces of what a job is and you're like, oh, that's something I would want to do. But if you don't have the full scope of everything that's entailed in the skill set that you truly need, you can try to prepare yourself for that role but not prepare yourself in the right way. So I think that's really smart to do that self-reflection, understand where your strengths and weaknesses are, but also really know the role you're going for as well.
Yeah, exactly that. Exactly that. And it's just really accurately mapping across your areas of strength and areas for improvement
Mm-hmm.
with that ultimate aim of where you want to be. Yeah,
Mm-hmm.
definitely.
And that could be a good measure too of whether or not that would be the right role for you, I think. Because if you create an honest reflection, having a third party perhaps help you map out what your strengths are, like you suggested, because we are biased against ourselves.
Yep.
I think that makes a lot of sense, because who knows? Maybe you'd look at a job and be like, oh, you know what? That's not something I'd be great at. Or you just work really hard to be great at it. I don't know. You could be the judge of that as the development person, but
Yeah, exactly. Well, and I think the reality is that not everyone knows exactly what their long-term goal is. Like, not everyone's going
mm,
to know what the end objective is. So, by
mhm,
sitting down and looking inwards and thinking, you know what, actually, what am I good at? Where are my strengths? And then that gives you a really good platform to, identify what perhaps your more short-term or medium-term goals should be if you don't
mhm.
have that full vision of where you want to be further along down the line.
Makes sense. What are some trends that you are seeing in learning and development regarding the individual? Like, what format of learning and development is popular amongst the industry?
So the world's obviously changing massively all the time, especially at the moment with everything to do with COVID-19.
Mhm,
I think that the biggest changes in learning were happening way before all of COVID. So with like modern careers and modern workplaces changing so much, the way in which we digest information and the way in which we learn has had to change a lot as well.
mhm,
With COVID, we've obviously really seen the rise of virtual learning, and as platforms like Zoom or WebEx or Microsoft Teams have become more widely understood, they've generally been more widely implemented in the learning world. In reality, though, I think virtual or live online learning has been around for absolutely ages. So it's not necessarily a more recent trend or change, because it's been around for quite some time. There is some really cool stuff coming out at the moment. So things like AI-driven platforms, which has personalized recommendation technology, and it's kind of like a Netflix for learning.
mm,
Stuff that knows what your goals are and what you like and how you like to digest information, and then it feeds you more of that. That's quite on trend at the moment. There's
mhm.
some really cool tech also for mobile learning and stuff around virtual reality, which is really interesting. But I think ultimately the key trend is that it's becoming clear that we generally need more learning that is delivered in an on-demand way, and stuff that you can digest on the go. Particularly, I think most industries are trying to do more with less, and particularly with less time. And if we look at the statistics at the moment, generally an individual has about 20 minutes at most per week to be able to commit to learning. So it's really important that any sort of future learning can be delivered in the flow of an individual's work, and that it's stuff that delivers immediate impact and is highly relevant.
You know what? We're busy people. We've got a lot going on. So, if all we got time for is 20 minutes a week, it's really great that learning and development is creating new platforms and adjusting the way to the consumer of how they're actively going to take in these skills. I think that traditional learning areas are great if you can dedicate yourself to full traditional learning. But if you can't, it really can put a big it really does impact people of not being able to progress in their goals if they can't take the time to invest in themselves. Because, people got to work, people got to take care of their kids, people have a lot of things to do. So I think these types of platforms really are helpful, and it kind of gives everybody the equal opportunity to amount to whatever they want to be.
Yeah, exactly. I think definitely sort of traditional, like larger scale learning and development interventions will still have their place, but
Hmm.
actually in the future, it's going to be about learning in the flow of work and kind of making small improvements that amount to a lot over time. So a lot of these new tech platforms are really going to allow learners to develop their own kind of process of continual learning and
Hmm.
learning small bits, little and often in the flow of work, which I think is really cool.
Absolutely. Can you give me an example of what a bite sized course would be like? So, are we talking about a course that is intensive or accelerated in a short time frame? Or is it kind of small lots of time over a span of weeks or months?
Yeah, so this can take shape in a lot of different forms. Now, bite size is quite a broad term and generally means a smaller piece of learning that's maybe 5 to 10 minutes long. It can be things like short videos or audio snippets or articles or even like some of these new mobile learning technologies, stuff you can do on the go. Some pieces of bite size you might consume as a one off. Other things, other bite sized chunks are kind of grouped together and can make up larger learning programs. A good example of this at the moment, I'm currently in the middle of completing a digital micro credential with Google,
Mhm.
and that is made up of a series of short modules containing 5 minute bite-sized videos with quizzes. And I might watch, one or two a week, depending on how work's going. At the end, I'm going to complete a final assessment, and after completing all of the course content and watching all of the bite-sized videos, you get a really cool certificate.
Mm.
So yeah, that's quite a good example of where bite size is brought together to make a larger credential, but it can really also be those one-off pieces that you do as and when.
I participated in the same certificate, and I completely agree that Google Digital Learning is amazing. And I really loved their breakdown, as it is more of an e learning aspect, but it kind of does a bit of a hybrid because it's e learning, but also has interactive videos and it has opportunities for you to do checkpoints along the way. It's really smart.
Yeah, exactly. And the way that it's structured really just these types of things allow you to learn in your own time when
Mhm.
it's convenient for you, which is definitely really important.
Okay. This comes up a lot in our frequently asked questions. Can you explain the difference between e learning and virtual learning? Because at face value, they sound like the same.
Yeah, it's definitely a tough one to get your head around if you're not specifically in the learning world. I think as the term e-learning has been around for a really long time, it generally covers anything that was in the earlier days considered electronic learning. So
Mhm.
traditionally, e-learning's been computer-based. It's self-paced digital learning that can include things like animations or videos or interactive activities. With e-learning, I think the main thing is that learners generally complete it in their own time without the support of an external trainer or facilitator.
Mm.
Now, if we compare that to virtual learning, virtual is kind of definitely closer to classroom learning. Virtual is generally led by an instructor or facilitator in real time, and you can usually see and interact with the trainer or other learners. And a lot of the time, you can work on collaborative exercises in breakout rooms. So generally, it replicates what we've done in the classroom environment, but using technology.
Amazing. Let's say you've figured out your goals, you're ready to do your research and find a course that meets the delivery option that best fits your learning style. Where should you be looking?
Yeah, very good question. Once you've figured out your goals and identified your kind of personal learning requirements, it's time to start looking at potential providers and delivery options. So, generally, if you're looking to pursue any kind of larger professional certification or a designation, it's usually best to start with the program owner or certifying body. Now, the reason I say that is you always want to make sure that any training you're going to do is ultimately going to contribute to your long term goal and that it can definitely be attributed towards completion of your chosen program. So, most program owners will offer advice on suitable training options or have recommended or approved providers that can support you with your training. Um, Here at BRCGS, for example, you can either learn directly with the BRCGS Academy, but we've also got a huge global network of over 300 approved training partners. And the majority of program owners will have similar structures that they can put in place to support their learners on that global scale.
Okay. I think there's a lot of things that you kind of pointed out here, but that really emphasizes the importance of checking back with, your program owner or different areas of, or not areas, but different resources that you trust. You know, get the recommendations, see where everyone else is looking, and kind of learn where in the industry people think it's reputable. If I'm wrong.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, it's fundamentally good to do your homework and make sure that any learning you're going to complete is ultimately going to contribute to a certification if that's what you're looking to achieve. And
Mhm.
the best place to obviously do your homework is with the trusted advisor at the source. So yeah, definitely
Yeah.
the program owner is a really good place to start.
Yeah. And regardless of who your program owner is, I'm sure that they're going to take the time to, really direct you in the right way, because it's in your best interest and their best interest for everyone to get really good training.
Yeah, exactly that. And the majority of the time, you'll be speaking with experts who know what they're talking about and are going to be best placed to provide advice.
Definitely. After establishing that this is something that can be of value to you, let's say you are a customer of BRCGS, you find a course in the academy that you want to take. Now it's time to approach your employer. This is probably the scariest part for people, especially in today's climate where we're in the middle of a pandemic and are asking to fund your training. What would you recommend as the best approach?
Yeah, I think you're right. It's often the most challenging part for a lot of people. The best place to start is to have an honest and open conversation with your manager or employer about your professional development, and remembering and having in mind that your professional development is a two-way street and it significantly benefits the business as well as the individual. Generally, most employers will recognize that and will work with you to develop your own personal development plan each year. I mean, if you're not working on a PDP with your employer, you can always be proactive and create one of your own using some of the steps we spoke about earlier, identifying your goals and planning. Um, so, yeah, definitely identify your strengths, your areas for development, your short, medium term goals, and link these to your current role. It's then really important when having this conversation with your employer to link any learning that you want to undertake back to your role and the benefit that will bring the business. And then it's best to present this to your employer in the absolute clearest and simple terms. So, yeah, you can focus on how the learning opportunity will help not only you develop the areas for improvement that you've identified, but how it will allow you to be more effective in your role and deliver greater value for the business. And then on top of that, if you can find a way of linking in how the training could perhaps pay for itself in the longer term, then you're definitely onto a winner. You also can speak to your employer to find out if there's any existing professional development pathways within your organization. Often employers do have existing pathways that kind of feed into succession management. So you want to find out if there is anything like that that you could perhaps get involved with as well.
Mhm.
So to break those down into some steps about actually taking that conversation to your employer. So go back to assess yourself and look inwards. Secondly, do your research and make sure that you're clued up and you've done all your homework. Then you need to create a very clear plan with clear objectives and achievable milestones, and
Mhm.
perhaps consider what a realistic budget is if you have one. Then you can take that to your employer and really, really clearly explain how this adds value both for you and the employer and for anyone that might be involved. And then lastly, stick to the plan. A plan's only good if you can carry it out and stick to it and can make it achievable. So yeah, definitely stick to it.
Stick to your plan. Absolutely. I must say, I love this breakdown. These 5 steps, I think, make a lot of sense and really do emphasize everything we've already talked about. Assessing yourself, doing your proper research, the creating a plan, like with clear objectives and milestones and a budget. I think that's the part that would be really interesting to your employer, because if you can genuinely show the breakdown of that and how you plan to achieve it, what the timelines would look like, that kind of thing, I think that would be the best way, to your point, to address them, because it shows that you've put the work in and you're not just on a whim had this idea and just want your employer to pay for it. So I think it's really great. I'm interested to know though, because you mentioned personal development plan.
Yeah.
So does the Academy have any kind of like templates or anything that you can offer for someone who doesn't really know where to start?
Yeah, so we've actually pulled together quite a easy to use and cool template that individuals can use, which really breaks down the areas of strength and areas for improvement. Short, medium, long term goals,
Mhm.
and then with a sort of framework, we'll be able to identify some training requirements and milestones. So yeah, we've pulled that together, and we can attach it in the program description for individuals to access if they want to.
Perfect. We'll put that in here.
Awesome.
Absolutely. Sounds great. Okay. I do think that one thing that is very true, right, is that Business 101 teaches you that it is less expensive to upsell your current customers versus gaining new customers. And I'm sure that this works the same way with employees. Plus, you have an employee that, has a really great advantage in understanding your company culture, knowing where the gaps are. Um, they've been in the field of that organization long enough to have a meaningful insight to what the organization could really use to grow.
Yeah, definitely. I think a lot of employers do recognize that, and they recognize the value of their staff and the importance of actually upskilling their staff. Also considering the costs that are associated with recruitment. These are absolutely astronomical for most businesses. So that aspect of employee engagement and talent retention massively important. It definitely pays dividends for businesses to keep their best talent in place and provide them with that platform to develop in their careers, because the business then gets the benefit of new knowledge and fresh perspectives from the learning, but also that existing kind of organizational knowledge that is there with the employee already.
Okay. What would you say to employers who are hesitant to invest in their employees' development, whether it's for cost reasons or a common idea that they will spend the time and money on that person and they're going to take their education somewhere else?
Yeah, this is a very good question. And I
Mhm.
think generally, if an employer is worried about their staff being trained up and then leaving, there's possibly some wider issues around culture and employee engagement that might need addressing. I think the bigger question for employers, or the bigger question that employers should be asking themselves is, what is the risk if we don't train our staff and they end up staying with the business?
Mhm.
If we don't have the most highly qualified and experienced individuals working to the highest standard, then how can we expect our employees to do the best job possible? And I think that's where the focus should be.
Good point, right? Because when you think about it, as much as, don't get me wrong, like experience on the job, you learn so much. And that in itself is so much amazing training and learning from people above you is a great option as well. But to your point, if you want to have the most up to date professionals, instead of replacing people, why not take the extra step to invest in them so that way you're consistently ahead of the game competitively? Because that's the only way that you get ahead is by having the most up to date qualified people who can strengthen the business.
Yeah, exactly that. And we kind of spoke about earlier on that the world is changing so much at the moment
Mhm.
that if employers don't look to develop their employees and keep ahead of the curve, if you're not really doing anything, then realistically you're going backwards. So yeah, so definitely, yeah, that kind of employee engagement and investing in your staff is absolutely paramount to making sure that you have that competitive edge.
Absolutely. And to your point, because I think every single person in the working world has experienced this due to the pandemic, you had to learn how to be agile and adjust to the change because every single business had a change, whether it was an influx because it's like, oh, my services are very much needed and I'm going to be in high demand, or a decrease because perhaps your business model didn't really fit the concept of being in lockdown. But it was the businesses that I think that put their heads together and tried to be agile and make accommodations. They're the ones who got to stay afloat. Of course, I do say that lightly. I don't mean to put down anyone who perhaps their business didn't stay afloat because some business models just simply won't work in the concept of a lockdown, and that there's no shame in that. But that concept of being ahead of the game by getting that training and trying to make those adjustments, you probably had to learn something new. And I think those are the people that you want on your team.
Yeah, exactly that. And I think those organizations that culturally focus on learning and development and have a culture of continuous improvement, that
Mm-hmm.
they generally are the businesses that are able to respond quickly because they've got individuals that are more adaptive and resilient and used to change and learning new things. So yeah, quite rightly, I think there's going to be circumstances where businesses, through no fault of their own, have experienced challenges. But
Mm-hmm.
generally, I think those businesses where you've got individuals that are adaptive and resilient, that they are best placed to be able to respond to the changing world.
Absolutely. Innovation is key. And that's what training helps you do. What about myths? You have written a few articles on behalf of the Academy about training myths and misconceptions of delivery methods. Can you give me 3 myths that you've debunked?
Yeah, sure. I think my favorite one has to be around virtual learning, but this goes back to way before I started working for BRCGS even. So I spent years working with customers and individuals who have said to me again and again that virtual training will never ever deliver the same impact as a classroom-based course. And I think it's really interesting to see now that because of COVID, the benefits of virtual have become really apparent, and people can, see the value in connecting with people from all over the world in real time, and they don't have to travel or stay over. I think there's definitely going to be a place for classroom in the future, but it's just been really interesting to see the mindset change for a lot of companies about how virtual has delivered some real benefit over the last 9 months. Secondly, is that most people don't feel that they've either got the time or money to perhaps invest in themselves at the moment.
Mm-hmm.
I think with such a variety of learning options out there, both free and paid for, there's definitely something that you can be doing to develop yourself if you so choose.
Mm-hmm.
And lastly, whilst it's definitely important to be able to demonstrate the value of your professional development to your employer, it doesn't have to be the defining reason why an individual should want to develop themselves. Like, you
Mm-hmm.
can always learn a new skill purely for your own benefit. If it benefits your employer as well, then great. If not, no problem.
Fair points. Fair points. And I like that you kind of got into people feel like they don't have either the time or the money to invest in themselves. Like, I'm not going to lie to you. I mean, I've done a lot of things to invest in my personal development. And I do find that there is a bit of extra accountability if you have to pay for something, whether if it was my employer who paid for it or from myself out of my own pocket. It's like, ooh, I put this money into it and I got to complete this now. So it kind of creates that drive and urgency. But I think it's really fair, though, all the points that you put out there. And it is important to just demonstrate the value of, like, if I do this for myself, it's going to benefit the company.
Yeah, definitely. And taking in that point, I also don't feel like everyone should feel instantly compelled to have to be doing something to develop themselves. Like, if it's
Mm.
not the right time for you, if you're not in the right place, that's equally fine. But I think it is just worth noting that there is so much out there in terms of free content or paid for content, that if you are in the in the space where you want to be developing yourself, there's definitely something for you if you might not have the money, or if you might not have the time to invest in a really long piece of learning.
I 100% agree with that. You can't push yourself into something you're not ready to do, because then it's a waste of your time because you're not going to take in the content the same way.
Yeah, exactly. It's just about having that well thought out approach, and if you are in the right space where you want to invest in yourself and perhaps do some learning, then yeah, going back to the beginning and taking a look at, well, what exactly do you want to achieve, and then breaking that down into manageable chunks that really fit in with your lifestyle and your kind of flow of life and your flow of work.
Absolutely. Your experience in the academy, Rob, is involved with the BRCGS professional program. Can you explain the purpose of this program?
Sure. So, yeah, we spoke about it before, and the world is obviously changing rapidly at the moment, and there's some really key global issues, things like globalization and rising consumer consciousness, things like climate change and shifting global demographics, and things like urbanization. And all of these are putting huge amounts of risk into global supply chains. So a few years back, BRCGS developed the professional recognition scheme, and this is all aimed at helping professionalize product safety and increasing the number of highly trained individuals that we've got working to support the safety and legality and quality of food and consumer products. And we also wanted to provide a platform for individuals to showcase their talent and expertise and have a clear pathway for career progression. So the program itself is made up of 3 areas in which you need to attend a total of 5 courses in order to gain the full professional status. The courses cover areas such as BRCGS standards, hazard and risk management, and product safety management. And the program itself is designed to go beyond existing industry certifications like HACCP, for example, which do form a part of the program. But it's aimed at developing more well-rounded industry leaders that are capable of both implementing BRCGS standards to a really high quality, but also aimed at individuals supporting and protecting their business and brand. So both BRCGS Academy and our approved training partners run all of these component courses, both as individual courses. We also run some fast track weeks, which allow aspiring professionals to fast track their way to professional status. We've also worked with a number of businesses globally who have chosen to implement the professional program on a wider scale. And it's really helped these businesses develop skills that give them that competitive edge, and helps provide them with greater confidence, both internally, but also for their customers.
All right, that's fair. That's fair. Okay, so I do have a question for you though.
Mm-hmm.
Given that you can get these courses done individually or maybe able to build these skill sets on the job, why take the accelerated course?
Yeah, I think it's quite simple that in reality, the accelerated version of the professional courses are simply not going to be for everyone. Now, whilst they're really useful at getting individuals up to full professional status at speed, obviously everyone's got a different learning style and they're going to want to learn in different ways. So our job is not to dictate one method over the other, but rather to provide choice and variety for our learners. I mean, for those organizations who need to rapidly deploy new skills at scale within their organization, that's great. We can help you with that through accelerated in-house training. And we've got some clients like Alpura in Mexico who have done this, with them being the first organization to certify their entire team as professionals. They've done it across food, packaging, and storage and distribution. So that's great. But on the flip side of that, you might be a quality manager, for example, in a much smaller team or a business who's working in a really busy role, who can only afford to maybe step aside from work to perhaps learn one day every 3 months. And that's also perfectly okay. So I think generally we're seeing such huge shifts that there is more of a tendency for individuals to learn smaller chunks, little and often, to fit in with the flow of work, which ultimately provide a higher volume of small improvements that result in bigger changes over time. So I think that's where digital learning is going to come into its own, kind of shifting that question away from specifically taking the accelerated course, for example. But I'd come back to you on that and ask you the question of how you keep your own skills up to date, and how has the way that you learn and digest information changed over the last year or so?
Ooh, I never get questions. Or very rarely. I shouldn't say never, very rarely. No, that's a fair point. So for me, I am in marketing, and marketing is very, very wide. It's a very wide genre of professionalism, and it would be silly to say I know every single thing in marketing. So there's always opportunities to develop myself further. And the way that I've been able to do that is I actually use audiobooks where I learn from different leaders that have proven different methods of digital marketing that worked for their platforms. I take courses kind of like with the Google certificate that you mentioned. And I do that in, again, bite-sized learning. I find that it's a lot easier for me to do it little bits at a time and commit to one thing at a time, and just to base on a specific goal that I think is important. So if I want to be more analytical, I'll pick a course that's based on that. If I want to improve my social media strategy, I will take a course on that. And it's just based on what skill set's important to me at the time. And as you can imagine, with everything going on with the pandemic, there's a lot of opportunities for me to build myself up and to improve in specific areas that I didn't necessarily have to work in before. So that's how I've kept myself accountable. But I had that drive, and I don't normally talk this long about myself, so hopefully that's enough to answer your question.
No, they're very good points. But I bet from your perspective, it's quite nice to have that choice and to know that you've got lots of options there and little things you can do to make those small improvements. And I imagine if, as part of your future personal development plan, you identified that there was some form of certification that you wanted to go after,
Mhm.
then you could possibly identify an accelerated course that you could go on to help you achieve that in a shorter space of time. But ultimately, it's about choice, isn't it? And
Mhm.
being able to have those accelerated courses on one hand, but then also these smaller, more easily digestible chunks on the other really means that you can continually be learning, which I think is really important.
Absolutely. And I think, again, emphasizing that element of choice, it was my choice to pick on those specific skills because that's where I wanted to improve or to just see a different perspective. Sometimes it's just that. Sometimes it's just to have that perspective of a comparative of like, what do I do versus what do these other people do that seem to work for them? Sometimes having that can be really helpful just to put yourself as a checkpoint because sometimes you'll do a course and be like, ooh, I knew a lot of this, but it's good to know. It builds your confidence.
Yeah, exactly that. And it sounds as though you've definitely reflected and kind of looked at where you are in your role and said, like, I'm good at this, or I'm good at that, or I can improve that. And you're picking out smaller, interesting things that you can, have a go at and see if it can help you develop and move forward.
Well, I try.
That sounds really good.
Absolutely. But I will say, though, in regards to the professional program, we've had the privilege to get some feedback. And honestly, like seeing some of these professionals, how highly they speak of the program is so impressive. I won't do too many name drops, but I will say that Alpura put so much work into their organization in so many different areas beyond training. And there is a reason why they got chosen as certified site of the year at the Food Safety Americas 2020 conference.
Yeah, definitely. They've got some really massive achievements in there, and it's really exciting to listen to them and hear about how just everyone in the organisation is really bought into the direction and the vision. So yeah, they're a really really great example of what a BRCGS professional can do.
And an additional shout out too, there's a lot of individuals who's really stuck out in the professional program. Like Gwen Sitzker was one of them who had an amazing experience that she created a video for us, and Saeed Rad as well.
Yeah, and Saeed was actually our first ever BRCGS professional. So
Mhm.
it's good to see Saeed sticking with it and seeing that he's continually improving himself. So I know that he's doing a great job with FGF brands as well.
Yeah, absolutely. And it seems like Gwen Sitzker from Embassy Ingredients as well has really had the opportunity to improve their structure and their overall operations based on her testimony. So lots of areas to think about if you want to look at a program that can help you accomplish those specific goals. Good to break it down, do your PDB plan, and if professional fits, great. But if not, there's so many other options that you can do.
Yeah, definitely. And for those people looking at professional as well, as you can probably hear in our voices, we've got a real solid group of passionate professionals. So it's lots of people there to kind of meet and learn from and grow your own professional network if professional is something you're considering.
Absolutely. So, as we've been talking about it, clearly there's a community that is built around professionals, as even we know specific people who participate in the program, and people have really taken the time to be involved in this professional community. Does this involve networking as well?
Yeah, it's actually a really important part of the scheme. And we currently run a number of events throughout the year where professionals can get together and meet each other and expand their professional networks. We actually have a dedicated BRCGS professional networking session at our upcoming virtual Leaders of Tomorrow event in September. And we'll be having similar networking events both at our Food Safety Europe and Food Safety Americas conferences next year. We've also got quite an active BRCGS professional LinkedIn group on my favorite platform, um, which you can join and engage with. We can include the link to that in the notes section of the podcast. And we've really got some big plans coming in the future as well with respect to growing the professional network. So definitely watch this space. The community is live and growing now, but there's definitely some big things in the pipeline.
Amazing. Rob, are there any final thoughts on how to approach an employer about professional development opportunities?
Yeah, sure. I suppose to summarize, individuals can be brave and don't be afraid to ask the question of your employer. Sit down and have that honest conversation. Secondly, I would say be crystal clear. So this means definitely planning, doing your homework, being clear about your own goals, and being able to present that in a way to your employer with clarity and a real clear demonstration of how your learning benefits everyone involved. Then create a plan, create a schedule with your achievable milestones and a budget, and stick to it, because consistency is definitely key. You can have the best plan in the world, but if you don't stick to it, it won't amount to a great deal. So stick to the plan. And lastly, I'd say just go for it. There's so much out there that you don't necessarily need to have a clear plan with your employer before you can get started. Like, you can have a quick Google search, maybe search for some free courses, and you might perhaps come across websites like edX or Coursera or FutureLearn, and even Google. We've got loads and loads of free learning and even full micro certifications that you can do at no cost. So if you're in that space where you're considering learning and investing in yourself, yeah, just go for it.
Be brave, be clear, and go for it. I love that tagline. You should put that on your LinkedIn page.
It sounds good, doesn't it? It sounds good.
Absolutely. Well, thank you so much, Rob, for joining me today. I think this was an amazing talk, and yeah, everybody take the chance, take the chance in yourself, invest in yourself to invest in a better future for your organization.
Awesome. Thank you for having me.
Absolutely. Don't forget, our events now have virtual offerings, and you can get your tickets from our website, brcgs.com/events, and you can check out what's in store for 2020 and 2021. If you have any questions about today's podcast, please email us at podcast@brcgs.com. Let's use science for a safer world, and thank you for joining us on Confidently Compliant, a food safety podcast.